Millionaire's woke daughter tries to evict Clint Eastwood from house without knowing. He was the new owner of the house. Her fingers trembled as they hovered over the property deed. The attorney's office had fallen silent, save for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic below. Sophia stared at the document before her, a simple paper that suddenly seemed to hold the weight of generations. 27 years of privilege, countless indulgences, and a lifetime of getting her way had led to this moment. Yet she felt like a child facing consequences for the first time. "You have 30 days to vacate, Ms. Wellington," announced the lawyer, his voice firm in the wood-paneled room. The family legacy hung in the balance. One decision to save herself, one chance to prove that her father's death hadn't broken her, one opportunity to silence the whispers that followed her everywhere. She'll never amount to anything. Her only value is her inheritance. She should have developed real skills while she still had the chance. Sophia looked down at her designer handbag. The price tag could have fed a family for months, and thought of her financial advisor's warning. "Without your father's support, your lifestyle is unsustainable." Then her eyes found the photograph on the lawyer's desk, a picture of her father with an older man she didn't recognize, their faces frozen in a moment of genuine friendship that seemed to mock her current predicament. Next to it sat the letter, explaining that the Carmel mansion, her intended summer refuge, was now the property of Clint Eastwood, the legendary actor her father had apparently befriended decades ago. "I suggest you read the will carefully," the lawyer continued. The anger rose inside her as she flipped through the pages, the familiar emotion bringing a momentary clarity. She scanned the document, traced her finger along the impossible conditions, and took a deep breath. The financial loss she could handle. It was the humiliation that had become her true opponent. The paralyzing thought of living under someone else's rules, of hearing her friends' mockery when they learned of her situation, of waking up each morning with the knowledge that her father had orchestrated this final lesson from beyond the grave. Page 15 outlines the specific requirements. Sophia placed her manicured finger on the paragraph and read the unbelievable stipulation. As the reality of her situation sank in, a familiar sense of indignation shot through her body, but for once, she couldn't simply buy her way out. The lawyer's office faded away. His explanations became distant. There was only Sophia and her father's final challenge now, locked in an intimate battle of wills that extended beyond death. Each word was a revelation about her father's intentions, each clause a small shock. Halfway through, her hands began to tremble uncontrollably, threatening to tear the document. Sophia paused, gripping the edge of the desk, tears threatening to ruin her perfect makeup as the weight of her father's final judgment crashed over her in waves. The memory of their last argument flashed before her eyes, her demanding more money while he pleaded for her to find purpose, and her breath caught in her throat. 6 months living with Mr. Eastwood is the non-negotiable condition. The lawyer's voice cut through her panic, and she looked up to see him standing. Her father's will clutched firmly in his hands, and on his desk that photograph, her father and Clint Eastwood, 2 men who had apparently conspired to reshape her life. That's when Sophia Wellington decided this challenge wouldn't be about securing her inheritance. It would be about finally understanding who her father really was. Though 6 months earlier, Sophia's life had been defined by absolute privilege. At 30, she was at the pinnacle of social media influence, with 3 million followers and a growing reputation in luxury lifestyle circles. Her partnership with Marcus, a self-important music producer, had become enviable in their world. They partied together, traveled together, and pushed each other to new heights of conspicuous consumption. Sophia's father, Robert Wellington, watched his daughter's lifestyle with a mixture of disappointment and regret. A self-made real estate magnate who had built an empire from nothing, he understood the hollow nature of wealth without purpose. "Your mother would be heartbroken," he often told Sophia during their increasingly rare conversations, invoking the memory of the woman who had died when Sophia was just 15. She always believed there was more to life than collecting luxury brands and social media attention. Sophia never argued with her father about this, but privately she dismissed his concerns. What could be more important than the perfect Instagram post, the transcendent feeling of being recognized at exclusive venues? Social media was her true home, a place where her carefully curated image became currency, where her strategic mind could solve the puzzle of increasing engagement and brand deals. "You approach life like it's a marketing campaign," Marcus once told her as they posed for photos at a celebrity-filled charity gala. With his calculated networking and relentless self-promotion, he was in many ways Sophia's perfect match. Where she was privilege and entitlement, he was ambition and opportunism. "That's because it is," she replied. "Image is everything." What neither of them acknowledged was the hollow nature of their relationship, the calculated social media posts, the public displays of affection that seemed perfectly timed for photographers, the way they leveraged each other for greater visibility. Sophia told herself their connection was mutually beneficial, that genuine emotion would only complicate their carefully constructed image. Marcus respected the arrangement, but couldn't hide his ambition to access her family's wealth. The launch of a luxury lifestyle brand that year seemed like a foregone conclusion. Sophia and Marcus had orchestrated the perfect marketing campaign, and the influencer community already spoke of it as though success was guaranteed. The night before the launch party, they sat on the balcony of their penthouse, the lights of Los Angeles spread before them like jewels on black velvet. "What happens after the launch tomorrow?" Marcus asked, his voice unusually calculated. Sophia looked at him, confused. "We start the next campaign." "I mean with us, Sophia. We keep dancing around your father's estate, and I can't do it anymore. I need to know what your inheritance situation looks like." The moment hung between them, heavy with implication. Sophia felt a flutter of disgust. She wasn't prepared for this transparency in her carefully constructed relationship. "Marcus, we have a good thing going. Why get into the finances?" "Because some investments are worth protecting," he said, his hand finding hers in a gesture that felt more possessive than affectionate. That night, for the first time in her privileged life, Sophia couldn't sleep. Her mind raced with calculations and concerns, mapping strategies not for increasing her influence, but for maintaining her lifestyle without her father's support. By dawn, she had made her decision. After the launch, she would secure her position as the primary beneficiary of her father's estate. But first, she had to maintain appearances. The meeting with her father was scheduled for the following afternoon. Sophia approached his office with her usual performative confidence, mentally rehearsing her request for additional funds. The conversation was predictable but increasingly tense, until she reached the breaking point and demanded to know why he couldn't simply support her chosen lifestyle. Robert Wellington's face hardened, and he finally spoke his truth. In that suspended moment, as reality crashed into her carefully constructed world, Sophia felt a curious sense of shock. Then came the sharp sting of her father's words about wasted potential, about her mother's disappointment, about his decision to restructure his will to force her to stand on her own. She didn't see the pain in her father's eyes as she stormed out, didn't hear him call after her as she slammed the door, didn't know that the stress of their confrontation would trigger the heart attack that would take his life 3 days later. By the time she received the news, it was too late for reconciliation, their last conversation hanging between them like an unfinished bridge to understanding. "You need to accept the terms of the will," the lawyer said, 6 months after her father's death. Sophia sat in the elegant conference room, staring at the documents outlining her new financial reality. "The trust we've established will provide basic living expenses, but access to the full inheritance requires you to fulfill your father's conditions. 6 months living in the Carmel property with Mr. Eastwood." Sophia nodded as though she were processing this information rationally, but inside she was already formulating her plan to contest the will. The lawyer didn't understand that wealth wasn't something she had, it was who she was. Without it, she was just another ordinary person with no distinction. Elena, her father's longtime housekeeper, who had accompanied her to the meeting, saw through her compliant facade immediately. You're planning to fight everything he just said, aren't you? She asked as they rode the elevator down to the lobby. I need my inheritance, Elena, Sophia replied, watching the floor numbers decrease. I can't just give up my lifestyle. Elena sighed deeply. It's not giving up to change direction when the path is leading nowhere meaningful. That's wisdom. She hesitated, then added softly, Have you even met Mr. Eastwood yet? The question hit her like a physical blow. I can't. Sophia, he's expecting you at the property. The arrangement is... I know exactly what the arrangement is, she snapped. I read the will. 6 months living arrangement, working as his assistant, learning about real values. She recited the conditions as though they belonged to someone else's life, not the final wishes of the man whose approval she had sought and never truly received. Your father believed in you. Well, he shouldn't have, Sophia whispered, turning to look out the window so Elena wouldn't see her vulnerability. The next week was grueling. Sophia approached her predicament like a business problem, searching for loopholes and alternatives. She consulted 3 different estate lawyers, all of whom confirmed the ironclad nature of her father's will. She called in favors from connected friends, trying to find someone who could influence the situation. During the day, she maintained appearances on social media, posting pre-scheduled content as though nothing had changed. At night, she faced the terrifying prospect of life without financial safety nets. The first time she arrived at the Carmel property, a stunning coastal mansion with breathtaking views of the Pacific, her composure gave out completely. The moment was surreal. Standing before her family's vacation home, now owned by someone else, the loss was monumental, amplified by memories of childhood summers spent there. Sophia sat in her car, staring at the house she no longer owned, and allowed herself 5 minutes of genuine grief before plastering on her practiced smile. It took 3 days before she could bring herself to knock on the door, another 2 before she could maintain a civil conversation with Clint Eastwood without barely concealed resentment. The adjustment was jarring, sometimes manageable, sometimes overwhelming enough to send her hiding in the guest bathroom to compose herself. She learned to navigate differently, more cautiously, holding her tongue, finding ways to maintain some sense of control in a situation where she had very little. When Marcus called to announce that a reality TV producer was interested in documenting her fish out of water story for a substantial fee, Sophia made her decision. She would find a way to profit from this situation, regardless of the will's stipulations or Elena's disappointment. She arranged the meeting in secret, calculating how to turn her humiliation into an opportunity. 2 weeks into her stay at Carmel, her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. Sophia, it's Eleanor. The housekeeper's voice sent a jolt through her body. It was familiar, warm, slightly accented, but also different, carrying an urgency she hadn't heard before. How did you know where I was? She asked, immediately regretting the defensiveness in her tone. Mr. Eastwood, she replied. I heard you're actually staying there. Sophia sank onto the window seat, suddenly drained. I don't have a choice. I know. There was no judgment in her voice, only understanding. I'm coming to visit. Elena, you don't... I need to, Sophia. For both of us. She paused, and Sophia could hear her shifting the phone. I have something your father left for you. Something he asked me to give you only when you were ready to listen. Sophia closed her eyes, transported back to her last argument with her father, to the harsh words that had passed between them before his death. I don't think I can face his judgments anymore. He wasn't judging you, Elena said softly. He was trying to save you. After they hung up, Sophia stood before the antique mirror in the guest bedroom and really looked at herself for the first time in months. The carefully maintained appearance was still there, but now accompanied by the subtle shadows under her eyes, from nights of genuine worry. Her face seemed vulnerable, the defensive set of her jaw slightly softened. She was changing, but was change necessarily something to fear? The night before Elena's visit, Sophia didn't bother with her usual social media updates. Instead, she sat on the terrace of the Carmel house, watching the same Pacific sunset her father had loved throughout his life. Tomorrow might reveal whether she still had a connection to the father she thought she knew, or if she would need to find the courage to understand the man he actually was. Now sitting across from Clint Eastwood in his study, Sophia was halfway to an understanding. Each conversation was both revealing and challenging, her mind processing insights that her privileged upbringing hadn't prepared her for. The discomfort was a constant companion, but she had begun to make space for it, to acknowledge rather than deflect it. 3 months into her stay, she reached a turning point, a moment requiring genuine vulnerability that was eerily similar to conversations her father had attempted to initiate. Sophia hesitated, her breath catching in her throat. Clint seemed to sense her internal struggle, the atmosphere in the room shifting. Time slowed as Sophia considered her options. The practiced response would maintain her emotional walls. There had to be another approach. Her mind raced, searching for a way to engage that her new circumstances demanded. There, a possibility for genuine connection that her usual social interactions would never allow. It would require a counterintuitive approach, sharing vulnerability in a way her instincts warned against. But it might work in this unfamiliar territory of authenticity. Sophia made her choice. She set aside her phone, breathed deeply, and shared something real about her relationship with her father, a truth that none of her social media followers would ever see, but it was precisely what this moment required. Her voice trembled, but steadied as she acknowledged the small crimp of regret that had been growing since his death. The final weeks of her mandatory stay were transformative. Every assumption was challenged, and the familiar patterns of deflection and superficiality seemed increasingly hollow. But Sophia had learned to move through discomfort, to distinguish between inconvenience and opportunity. When she found the old screenplay her father and Clint had written together decades ago, something shifted. Sophia looked at the yellowed pages, at her father's handwriting filling the margins with notes, at the creative dreams he had set aside to build his business and provide for his family. She was seeing him clearly, not with the resentment or entitlement of her previous perspective, but with compassion and understanding. The discovery coincided with a call from Marcus, who'd learned about the will's stipulations and was furious. She hadn't told him. "This is ridiculous, Sophia. Just contest the will and be done with it. I've got connections who can make this go away." As he continued to rant, Sophia realized something profound. His voice, once so persuasive, now sounded hollow and calculating. When he finally paused for breath, she simply said, "I'm staying the full 6 months, Marcus. I need to do this." "For what? To live like a commoner? This isn't you, Sophia." The silence that followed was revelatory. Maybe this wasn't who she had been, but perhaps it was who she could become. In the 5th month, during a community event in Carmel that Clint had encouraged her to attend, Sophia met Elena again. The housekeeper brought what she had promised, a handwritten letter from Robert, sealed with instructions that it be delivered only when Sophia was living at the Carmel house with Clint. Later that night, alone on the terrace where her father had spent so many evenings, Sophia opened the letter with trembling hands. His familiar handwriting filled several pages, explaining what she had never understood. His journey from ambition to wisdom, his regrets about their relationship, and his hope that by creating this situation, he might give her the one thing. His money could never buy perspective. The descent was almost harder than the climb. As the belay team lowered her to the ground, Morgan felt the adrenaline drain from her body, leaving only exhaustion and pain in its wake. Her right leg buckled as her feet touched the floor, but before she could fall, strong arms caught her. "I've got you," Alex said, his body now serving as the counterbalance to hers. "I've always got you." Morgan looked up into his face, thinner now with a small scar along his hairline, but his eyes still held the same warmth that had once terrified her with its promise. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry I didn't come see you." "You're here now," he replied simply. "We're both here now." As they moved away from the wall together, each compensating for the other's new limitations, Morgan realized that she didn't care about her score or her ranking. For the first time in her life, standing on the podium wasn't the goal. She had climbed her mountain and found something more valuable at the top, not victory, but the courage to fall and rise again. The judge's voice came over the loudspeaker, announcing her score, but Morgan wasn't listening. She was looking at Alex, at her father, at the climbing community that had gathered to witness not a comeback, but a transformation. She didn't need their validation anymore. She had finally learned that some mountains aren't meant to be conquered, they're meant to change you in the climbing. Later, as the competition continued, Morgan and Alex sat side by side in the viewing area. Their hands found each other, fingers interlacing naturally, as though completing a route they had started mapping long ago. "What happens now?" Morgan asked, echoing Alex's question from that night before everything changed. He smiled, the slight asymmetry of his expression a reminder of all they had endured. "We find new mountains," he said, "together." And for the first time in 18 months, Morgan felt the weight lift from her shoulders, lighter than chalk, heavier than love, exactly the balance she needed to move forward. Character count, 13,246.